Enjoy what you have right now because it's not gonna last. Okay, it's not gonna last. Consciousness is not thinking. Consciousness is not intelligence. There are still these cool mysteries in the universe and in our own brains.
Hello, everyone. This is Evolving Echoes, Martin and Monica.
Hello.
Today we have a special guest, Jaan Aru, neuroscientist, specializing in studying consciousness. So, yeah, we have like a round of many interesting questions for you today.
Shoot.
Yeah, for sure. So, tell us, how are you doing, and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jaan, and officially, actually, I'm not a neuroscientist because I work in an institute of computer scientists. So officially, I'm a computer scientist or a person who studies artificial intelligence. However, you're correct in the sense that my background and my heart is in neuroscience. So, although actually I started studying psychology. So maybe I'm a psychologist. You know, who knows? I've done a lot of things. I'm fundamentally curious about how our brain works and how it gives rise to consciousness. I'm curious about how similar are the artificial intelligence tools we have to our minds. What are the differences? How can we best use them, etc. So all of these questions have been troubling me for the past 20 years.
What is the cause of that, though? Like, how did you exactly got interested into this area?
Yeah, that's also a fun story because when I was in the 11th grade, so just kind of, or even in the last grade of the school, then I didn't know that I will become a scientist. I thought maybe I will study economics. But then in the end of that final grade, I had this click. Okay, I'm a small guy. I need to study big questions. So, what is it going to be? The universe or the brain? And then I thought, well, we probably will figure out the brain sooner than the universe. Probably I was wrong. That was foolish. We know, I think, more about the universe than about our own brain. But in any case, then I went to study psychology. I didn't know that I will become a scientist, and still I didn't have a clear interest. But then what happened was that I was sitting in a library reading some books, and then a book caught my eye, and it was about consciousness. Strange book, I thought, but I started to read, and then suddenly I realized, wait a second, there is this problem that I never heard about. How matter becomes mind. How the neural machinery in our heads gives rise to consciousness. I never thought of that problem, but I got really hooked on that. You have sometimes these situations where you suddenly feel also, in your body that, oh, this is something really cool. That was the feeling I had. I was like 19, turning 20 or something like that. And then I got really hooked on the problem of consciousness, trying to understand how then the brain can create our subjective experiences.
That's an interesting story, I would say. So, how do you define consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways how people can define it. But if you look at the research that's done on consciousness, then the usual way we go about it is that we say consciousness is not thinking. Consciousness is not intelligence. Consciousness is experience. Meaning that, when I come and pinch you, then you feel it, and the problem of consciousness is, okay, yeah, you had all these processes going on about how the signals moved into your brain, how you had some kind of process in your brain, but why does this feeling of being pinched come about? Or now, for example, you're listening to this podcast. It sounds really simple to you. Yeah, simply listen to stuff. But the fact that you hear it is experience. that's not trivial that you have this type of an experience, because it could be that your system simply processes information without having this experience part. So in short, the problem of consciousness is about experience, why we have experience. And once we have settled that, then the other problems, for example, how come am I aware of myself, will become way easier. So in the most fundamental sense, it is about experience of why does it feel to be me like the way it does.
What? Yeah, you can go.
Yeah, guys, you can fight it out.
There is this famous quote. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, by René Descartes. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you said makes me think that the correct way to say this is, I experience, therefore I am.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it exactly right. That for a long time we have put intelligence as the most important thing for humans, for example. Now we have machines that are in some tasks more intelligent than we are, and therefore I think it's very important to recognize that, look, there's this other component, experience component, that is different from these more intellectual things, but that might be even more fundamentally important for being a human or being a living being.
Where does this consciousness exactly originate from? Does it come from our brain, or does it exist outside of it? How do you?
Well, yeah, I mean, fundamentally, as I'm a scientist, I have to say that, there might be some things that we still don't understand, but based on the stuff we understand today, we are pretty sure or almost certain that it does come from the brain. Because, I won't do these experiments here, but, if I would cut out a certain part of your brain, you would have a certain deficit in your consciousness. For example, perhaps you would stop seeing faces. You would see me here doing all these things, you were here to my voice, everything else is intact, but you simply don't see my face. Or there's another area in the brain related to motion detection, so if we would selectively injure that, then you would see faces, you would hear, but you cannot see movement anymore. So my hand would be here and then suddenly here. So we can selectively disrupt parts of your consciousness, and that demonstrates that consciousness is somehow in the brain. But the scientific question is then how, which processes in the brain give rise to consciousness. And that's a different question, where we have a couple of different theories, or actually tens of different theories of consciousness. But fundamentally, I think the answer is that we still don't know exactly how the brain gives rise to consciousness. There might be a couple of researchers out there, or maybe many researchers who say, oh, we know it's, for example, it's because of a global workspace in the brain or some other theoretical construct. I'm more skeptical. I think that we really, really have to still understand many things about consciousness, because before we can fundamentally nail it down and say, okay, we understand what consciousness is. So we think it comes from the brain, but how exactly, we don't know.
Yeah. I have an interesting thought. When you were talking, it simply put, consciousness is like a composition of things that are responsible for experiences. And how do we experience things? Thanks to our senses and in our brain.
Yeah, it's not that simple, because, of course, and here's where the plot thickens, because you can fundamentally also perceive things without being conscious of them. So, for example, I could show you very briefly an image, very briefly, so you don't consciously see it, but I can see in your brain that, your brain processes this image. We can even see that it will influence your behavior. You didn't perceive it consciously. That shows that it's not simply sensory processing, it's something in addition. It's some kind of a specific process. So fundamentally, that's what we also think, that, most of the stuff that goes on in your brain is not conscious. So consciousness is only a tiny bit that, changes from moment to moment depending on what you are experiencing. But it's just a tiny bit of what happens in the brain. And then we have to answer, okay, we have these processes in the brain that can give rise to consciousness. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Okay, how can we narrow it down? How can we understand it? And that's what the science of consciousness is all about.
That's a good point. Like that some things go beyond our senses, and I think I know it. Can we refer it as a subconsciousness?
Well, yeah. It depends on the exact terminology we use. So in science, we often use unconscious processing.
Okay.
But sometimes people use preconscious. Subconscious is less used in scientific fields, but the idea is the same, that, there is a lot of stuff we process completely unconsciously, right? For example, when I'm now answering your questions, then it's not that I consciously think, okay, what will I answer? What will be the exact words and how will I say it grammatically correctly, right? Rather, I consciously have a very vague general direction of what I want to do, and then the words come out, the grammar comes out more or less correctly, right? That's all because in the brain there are these unconscious zombies doing all the kinds of this processing, putting these words into my mouth.
Yeah. I think Martin had an experience with anesthesia, right? About
Yeah.
consciousness. What's his story, Martin?
I have had interesting experiences generally where I was out, I fainted a couple of times in my life. Once I hit my head really hard and I got injury, and I was also out. And I was under anesthesia as well when I was getting a small surgery. So I would say those experiences were quite different. And I was wondering if I was still conscious. I don't think I was conscious when I was under anesthesia because I don't remember anything. Also, I was a teenager. But when I fainted, I think I was experiencing something. It felt like I was seeing a dream, and it was very real. And like I was somewhere else, and then suddenly it all falls apart, and you just wake up.
Yeah. I mean, this speaks very well to the differences of, or varieties of conscious experiences we can have. And you already mentioned dreams within your fainting episodes. Dreaming is a thing we do basically every night, and it is a different kind of conscious experience from the waking conscious experience. But also every night we have these moments during the deep sleep, especially in the beginning of sleep, where we are not conscious. So if I would wake you up there, then you would say nothing is going on in your mind, right? So this shows that we have this variety of experiences. And then your fainting episode, I would say that, if you felt that you still experienced something, for example, a dream, then you were not unconscious during that time. Whereas anesthesia is a clear example where usually people are unconscious. And anesthesia is a great example of where we have mastered as a humankind how to basically change consciousness safely and systematically. But we fundamentally don't know how it works. So we know what are the anesthetics. There are different anesthetics that are used. We know a bit about how they work. And again, there would be some people who would say, oh, we understand it. But I think we fundamentally don't understand why anesthetics change consciousness. We have a couple of theories. And one is, for example, that anesthesia induces very strong kind of local on and off. So in neural terms, local on and off periods. So one brain area can be completely off, the other might be on, and because it decouples these brain areas, basically there's no consciousness. But it's just a theory. I mean, I'm not saying that I fully buy into that, but it's a good example where we have specific drugs. They have specific effects in the brain. They systematically change consciousness, but we don't know how it works, right? We have theories, but we don't know. And the same thing is about psychedelics. Psychedelics is another example of drugs that create a different variety of conscious experiences. Again, there are theories, a kind of why psychedelics to work the way they work. But fundamentally, again, I think if we are pretty honest or really honest scientists, then we would say, yeah, we really don't understand why psychedelics lead to this kind of effect, why anesthetics lead to that kind of an effect.
Oh, yeah, I see. Um, what about when I got this injury? So I hit my head pretty hard, and I think I was unconscious. And it actually took me a while to remember what exactly happened, how I exactly ended up like that. Um, and I don't remember and I don't think I experienced anything or saw any dream. I think my brain was really off at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's important also to say that the brain was not off. So even if you're under anesthesia or you're in deep sleep, then your brain is still working.
Yeah.
It's still, we see local activity patterns. You could even show sensory stimuli to the anesthetized brain and get in some areas roughly the same responses as during wakefulness. So the brain is not off, but it's consciousness that's off, right? And hitting the head is a good example of the fact that the processes that we think are simple are actually more complex, because when you're listening to this podcast, then it seems, oh, it's so easy to remember things, I simply some interesting things are remembered. But if you have cases like yours, then we systematically see that people who have head trauma, they don't remember stuff. Sometimes they don't remember simply the last hour. Sometimes they don't remember more stuff. But the fact that they don't remember actually how they got into that, what was the last thing, what was the last hour or half an hour, means that every time you learn something, then it's not that stuff is automatically put into memory, but rather there is a process of, let's say, some time can be up to 24 hours that we call consolidation, where actually this memory trace is put into your memory. So if you hit your head, then that process is stopped, and that's why people usually, first of all, don't remember anything, and second of all, if the hit is strong, then yes, you might be unconscious because it disrupts the way the neural processing works.
I have another interesting question that happened to me after I got that injury. I started experiencing lucid dreams.
Wow.
And since I was a kid, I mean, like 12, 13, it was very bizarre to me. And even my parents couldn't understand because no one knew what lucid dream is. And I experienced it after that, like throughout my life several times. That's very interesting.
Yeah, this is something that we sometimes see, that when there is a brain injury, then some functions can suddenly be like released. It's not always like that, so please don't try it at home. It's rather rare, but still it does happen. It can happen that people become, in some respects, not in all respects, but in some respects, for example, more creative if they get a brain injury. Again, don't try it home. It's not
No.
systematically, but there are these cases. And lucid dreaming, indeed, we understand now better that it requires that basically a part of your brain basically wakes up that usually is sleeping during dreams and can then take control over your dreams. And again, probably this head trauma then somehow facilitated it.
Yeah. But I didn't have a brain injury exactly. It was like a broken bone here.
Well, yeah, but it's still
But it definitely-
yeah, it shake things up a bit,
It
right? You know,
Definitely
it's, yeah,
did.
yeah, yeah.
Definitely did.
So it's the brain basically is inside the skull here, but it's not, everything is not super fixed. So if you have a big hit into the head, then the brain also basically gets let's say bumped a bit, and then it will take some time to recover.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It took me 2 years.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just gonna divert this topic towards a different line right now, right? So do you think like the other animals also experience consciousness in the same level as we do?
Well, there are two things. So first is, do they have consciousness? And when you would have asked people working on consciousness 30 years ago, many of those people, researchers, would have said, no, humans, only humans are conscious. This has changed. This has changed a lot over the last 30 years. So now most consciousness researchers would say that yes, other animals are also conscious, definitely other mammals, because their brains are very similar to us. There are many consciousness researchers who would say that if you take an octopus, for example, it also has consciousness. But I think there the argument is a bit weaker, because the brains of an octopus are way more different than ours. But with mammals, yeah, most scientists agree that, you know, if humans are conscious, then other mammals who have a very similar brain are also conscious. The second aspect is that, you know, do they have the same level of consciousness? And there I think, and most people would say not, that consciousness, as we discussed in the human brain, also when we go across the mammals, there are varieties, there are different types of consciousness. For example, and I mean the simplest idea is that, you know, other animals probably they cannot be conscious of an idea, of something abstract. The way we, for example, we are discussing very abstract things. Consciousness itself is, in some sense, as a term, is abstract, right? Other animals don't have consciousness of these things. But when we go to, for example, pain, then other animals, other mammals, most likely can feel pain. Most or many mammals can probably even feel pain when the member of their family dies, for example, something like that, right? But again, in humans, it's more complex. It's a bit more different, and we have a bigger variety of these conscious experiences. Animals have a different consciousness, and of course, also in some respects, some animals will have consciousness of things where we humans, we cannot really imagine it at all. The classic example, and bringing it back to the question of what's the definition of consciousness, the classic example comes from Thomas Nagel, who 50 years ago asked the question, okay, what does it feel like to be a bat? And basically he first made the point that, you know, the consciousness of bats, if they have consciousness, is way different, because they use very different senses to us. We cannot even imagine that. And secondly, yeah, that consciousness differs between animals, and that consciousness is this feeling of being like something, and we cannot really imagine what does it feel like to be a bat, what does it feel like to be an elephant. But also, I cannot really fundamentally and to the exactly understand what it feels like to be you or you, right?
Yeah.
Point.
Yeah. Like sometimes, like I think that when we get up in the morning, why I am being myself, right? Why I am not getting up in his body or your body, right? That's like why it's not messing up this consciousness.
Yeah, because it's your brain. The brains are very different, so I cannot simply swap the brains. I mean, this is a classic example. When I go to schools and talk to children, then I ask, okay, what's the most important organ? And most of them, or many of them, say the heart. Those of them who recognize me, they say the brain, but, you know, many of them say the heart. But, you know, already 50 years ago, you could make a heart transplant, right? You could take a heart, put it into the body. Again, don't try at home, but, you know, fundamentally, you could do it. It works. nothing bad happens. But you cannot do it with the brain. So there's no way of transplanting a brain, because if I remove your brain, then it's not your consciousness anymore. If I put your brain into your body, then it's your consciousness in a strange, different body, right? Right. So that's the point, that our consciousness is tied to the neural machinery. You cannot somehow detach it from there. Yeah.
How does it vary between the twins? I mean, if they are like born almost all together, like around the same time, then they say that some sort of telepathy is between them, right? But
Yeah, I mean,
it's
in the end, it's not telepathy, but because their brains are very, very similar, as similar as it gets, but not really similar to tiny details. They still have different. The brains are still different to some extent. But then the telepathy happens because, if they hear something, for example, this podcast, then because the brains are relatively similar, then this will lead to similar ideas. Not because one thought and this was transplanted to the brain of the other, but because the common cause led to similar brain activations, similar experiences, similar thoughts.
Okay, yeah, I see. So do you think like through the period of evolution, our consciousness have changed?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think the dinosaurs had a very different consciousness to us, fortunately or unfortunately, and that it changes, and consciousness fundamentally depends also on the environment we have, and the thoughts we have learned to think, the experiences we have learned to cherish. So you could imagine a person who basically is all the time in TikTok, basically every single moment in TikTok. Their experience will be very different to a person who is used to, for example, taking long walks in nature, thinking about other people, really taking time to converse with other people. Their conscious experiences will be very different, and that's an example of how actually technology can change our consciousness also.
Since you happen to have some psychology background,
I do.
I have an interesting question about that. It's something I've been struggling with, let's say, and I've actually discussed this with a therapist and psychologist. How to deal with the flow of uncontrollable thoughts. You sometimes have that. Happens to me at night, for example, and I cannot fall asleep. And why does it happen? Why is it so hard sometimes to just get a hold of it? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and the first point I would like to make is that it's very, very common. So anyone who listens to us and feels, oh, I have the same thing, then don't think of it as some kind of a problem. It's a very human thing that we have it, because we have this thought generating machine, the brain, and there are then different components, and one of these components is this voluntary control, which is usually kind of put here into the prefrontal cortex. But if we are tired or stressed, then the prefrontal cortex cannot do its job so well, so it cannot really inhibit these other processes and thought generating processes so well. So that's why we often have these things, for example, going to sleep. And I can very much relate to that, because I had it for a long time. But at some time point I realized that, okay, I talk a lot about the brain, I talk a lot about sleep, so let's figure this thing out. So there are a couple of tips that I can give you. Now, the first tip is that, roughly, let's say, half an hour or something like that, before going to sleep, you should stop really working or looking at your phone or doing something really active. Read a book. If it's a boring book, the better. Listen to music. Again, don't listen to your favorite artist's new song, but something that's a bit boring.
Elevator music.
Do something that's a bit boring, or take a hot shower. Do some kind of a ritual that basically tells your body, okay, I'm not thinking anymore. I'm now getting ready to sleep.
Yeah, calm the heck down.
Yeah, you don't have to say it like that, but you could be more calmer.
Yes.
But the point is that then you get to bed, and the second trick is that the simple rule is that whenever I feel that my thoughts are spinning in my brain, I I stand up, I do something else, because I say, in the bed, I don't do that. I should not do that. Again, don't be harsh on yourself, because sometimes it happens, but have this kind of a soft rule for yourself that you don't do, because I mean I have done it, and I have experienced it a lot, that sometimes you do it for 2 hours, 3 hours, and the thoughts go around, but not anymore. So because I now got a handle on that. And the third trick is that okay, what do you do then when you're in the bed? And this is something I figured out. I never right. It's not something I tested scientifically, but it works with me. Is that I cannot really think, because as soon as I think, then this problem starts, or the thoughts come. So what I do is I visualize. I'm in the bed and I visualize something. Could be that you visualize some kind of scene. Could be that you visualize, for example, some kind of walking path that you take, maybe something that you know very well, and you stick to it. So it's not that as soon as you feel that the thought is going elsewhere, you stick to it. You go back. Okay, now I'm walking from my home to my work very, very slowly, like something like that. So, or you visualize something else. So these 3 tricks, try it out. Maybe it helps.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not selling it to you. I'm not saying that it definitely works. It worked with me, and I had the same trouble for a long, long time.
What about intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, they are also something that humans quite often have. If there have been this service, then it turns out that many people have them. Again, don't be afraid of them. Don't worry about them. You have to take this philosophical standpoint that the when you think about these things, then it doesn't make them true. So that you have this control and agency. You can control yourself. So the fact that a thought comes to your mind from your unconsciousness or subconsciousness, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a problem, right? So and again, many people have it actually.
Oh, so it doesn't really come from consciousness.
Well, the fact that a thought comes up, it comes from something, from some unconscious processes, right?
Okay.
And then consciousness is more related to this control, that you can say, okay, I'm ignoring it, I'm doing something else, I will now do this instead of focusing, for example, on these thoughts. So it's always like, as I said, consciousness is only a tiny part of what our brain does, and there are all of these unconscious processes. They are stupid, but for example, one phenomenon I have studied is the aha phenomenon, aha moment, where you suddenly understand something, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh
In the-
yeah, oh, it makes sense, yes. And this is also something that happens in unconsciousness, right? So, and then because it suddenly comes to consciousness, then you have this moment, now I understand, right? But something happened in your unconsciousness.
Yeah, that's really, never thought about it. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You have a question?
You have a question about the other thing, right?
I have
Other
one.
thing,
He also has
yeah.
more. He has many
So-
questions. So.
So I have these questions that are really related to my personal life. And
So that's why you guys do podcasts, yeah. No, but that's why most people do podcasts.
Yeah.
Actually, they want to understand something about themselves. It's very human.
So I'm a software engineer,
Mhm.
and her too, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And my work, my job involves a lot of learning. And like, for example, last year I changed like my project, let's say, and this brought a lot of change to what I do, like new tech stack, like new things to learn, new kind of projects, new kind of even like specialization, let's say. And I am in my 20s, quite young, and like learning comes easy. It's always been like my main skill, learning something quickly. and I read about brain plasticity
Hmm.
that is like very related to this. And I was thinking, how is it gonna be for me in 20 years? How is it gonna change? If it changes, how exactly does it? But for the worst, or and if it does, then how do I sustain it throughout my life? You know, so I can
Yeah.
keep this amazing
That's a good
skill.
question.
'Cause
First of all, enjoy what you have right now because it's not gonna last. Okay, it's
Thank you.
not gonna last. But the fact that you have it now, you should make full use of it. That's why I always say that people in their 20s, they are the most amazing generation and most amazing people because they have this power, they have this motivation to change the world, and they have the brain power actually to do it, right? And I just turned 40, and oh man, oh, let's not talk about that. But it's way harder in the sense that you really have to push yourself, and you simply sometimes you're not so motivated to do things, and if you're not so motivated, then it's also harder to use your brain's plasticity, for example. So in general, yeah, the 20s are the best time to get stuff done because you have already enough background knowledge, you have the motivation, you maybe have the money to do something, and then you have this brain power to actually do it. So my recommendation to all of you who have that kind of an age is don't waste that time. That's the best time of your brain, basically. And I think in the 20s, if you build a solid foundation, then you can still, of course, do many things, and what will accumulate over time and get better is knowledge. It's called this kind of a particular type of knowledge is called wisdom. So people like me, I don't have that kind of a raw brain power. If we go to a new problem, you will be way quicker than I will. But if you talk about something where I have knowledge, then even if you could read quicker than I can, then I still, because of my knowledge, I can add something to the conversation. So it's not that everything will go worse, but in terms of brain plasticity, definitely, the brains of 40-year-old, 50-year-olds, they are still plastic, but they are not as plastic. You cannot learn so fast as you can in your 20s. So guys, enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it.
So I'm good till I'm 40.
Well, it depends, it depends also on how you really how you treat your brain, right? What do you do with it, and all these things. So for example, one worry I have, and again it's not a topic of today's conversation, but one worry is that I have is that when people they simply have too intensive experiences, for example, because they are all of their free time in TikTok, let's say, they have all these varying experiences, then perhaps it actually tears down their brain's plasticity, because they experience so many things so fast, and it's not natural. So my recommendation, again, it's not based, I mean, we don't have full science on this, but my recommendation would be use your brain power, do things that are motivating for you, but also take time off, and don't simply scroll in TikTok for 4 or 5 hours, because, your brain is precious. If you're in your 20s, then you have the best time of your life. Do something valuable with it, and you can always scroll in TikTok when you're 40.
Oh, sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, that's a good advice, I'd say.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I still don't. I still try to push and do some things, but it's getting very, very hard. Yeah.
If we do something repetitively, for instance, learning
Yeah.
a book or something, right? Then does our consciousness increase, or like
Well,
you? Yeah.
it depends on the book. So if it's a dull, boring book, then actually your consciousness might shrink in the sense, in the moment you're like, why the heck do I have to do it? What is this thing, right? And then it's not, your consciousness is not increasing. But of course you have these kinds of books that are really the types of books that give you something, and that you even cannot understand when you read it the first time. For example, Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha comes to mind, right? When I read it in my, I don't know, teenage years, I didn't really understand that book. That was really boring. Then I read it again when I was 20 something. I understood it more. And when I was 30 something, then I really got this kind of these well, maybe I didn't still get the main ideas, but I got much more, and I felt that really my consciousness expanded because of these tiny book and the ideas that are contained in it. So it always depends, right?
Yeah. But okay, let's talk about AI. I mean, it's very popular, getting very popular these days, right? Does consciousness exist outside of our human brain, like in the machine or something? Yeah.
Well, it's again a question that it depends on whom you ask, right? So if you go to many people working on AI, they would say, of course, look how intelligent it is, look what kind of tasks it can solve. If you talk to it, it answers like a human. Of course it has consciousness. What's the question? There are other AI researchers who say, I don't care, you only do engineering, I don't care. But then there is currently, I would say, still a tiny fraction of people, including me, who says, look, we have to get something straight. The brains are way more complex than they are AI systems. And as we discussed already today, intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing. So even if you have these super intelligent systems, then this does not grant us the reason to say that, they have to be conscious. That's a fallacy. That's a wrong way of thinking about it. Rather, as we discussed already also, when we look at other mammals, let's say dogs, we say their brains are very similar to us. So then we should take that as a criterion to understand whether AI systems are conscious. When we talk about it, then often AI researchers says something like, oh yes, but GPT-5 or future AI systems, they will have the same level of complexity that the human brain has. Because they will have the same number of neurons and connections as the human brain has. Guys, if you listen to this, then know that this is a fallacy. This is a mistake. Because the complexity of our brains does not rely within the number of neurons and connections. Rather, it lies in the single neurons themselves. So let's not do this here, but if I would take 2 neurons out of your brain, I could put them into a petri dish, and I could see they start, making connections, growing, doing things. They're like tiny living beings, right? They are cells. They are really existing. They can do things. If I would look into one cell, into one neuron, I mean, there are billions and billions of processes every second that happen within one cell. So it's super complex. Now, let's go to an artificial neuron. What is an artificial neuron? It doesn't exist. It's a piece of code. So you cannot really take it out, put it into a petri dish. There's nothing going on inside because it's just a line of code. So on the level of these single units, there is this huge difference where the neurons in your brain are vastly more complex. Now, some AI researchers would say, well, that doesn't matter because our consciousness, our intelligence, everything is just in the connection patterns between the neurons. But that might be wrong, right? That's an assumption some people, including some neuroscientists, have. But I myself, over these 20 years, I've come to think that, actually perhaps our consciousness can only be understood if we take that vast complexity into consideration. So something to take from this discussion is simply that, we shouldn't just say that because AI has the same type of output and can converse like humans, it has consciousness. That's a fallacy. And second, whenever somebody talks that, the AI systems are getting as complex as the brains, then that's also a misunderstanding. On the level of single neurons, we are worlds apart. In the near future, we're not getting there. And then the main question then for researchers like me is, okay, how can we then show or demonstrate that this complexity within the single neurons really matters for consciousness? And that's something we are then working on, and hopefully we can make like better claims in the future.
Mm-hmm. Will it ever be possible to, upload or expand our consciousness into another human being?
Maybe a machine.
Well, yeah, there
Or
are
maybe
there are
a
many
machine.
many ways to think about it. So first of all, if somebody simply says, "Oh, you can basically," and this is something that is a thing now, that they say that, "Oh, look, you give us all of your data, all of the written blogs, every comment, every email you have written, and we can then basically conserve your consciousness." Don't do that, because that's just a pattern of conversations. That's not consciousness. The second level is people who say, "Oh, we can basically scan your brain in a very high detail, and then once you're gone, we can basically upload that pattern into the cloud, the pattern of your connectivity, and you will live there." Again, based on my understanding and what I just said, don't give your money to that either. So if you're really interested in that, then the way to preserve consciousness is something like we have to have new biological-like materials, and we have to be able to 3D scan your brain at some kind of a very detailed level, and then print it basically into some kind of another type of
Vessel.
yeah, something different.
Bio-vessel.
Yeah, but this is currently there's no way of doing that. But so that's what I'm answering, that these ways that we currently are advertised, they don't work. So don't fall into that. But fundamentally, of course, I'm not saying that only brains can be conscious. Because fundamentally, if you can do something that has all of these magnificent properties our brains have, then it will be conscious. And fundamentally, so you could live on in that kind of systems. We simply don't have that yet. And it's very hard to do, because I mean, imagine there are 100 billion neurons in this tiny brain, right? So everything is squished together. It's very hard to get a good kind of a recording of that, and it's very hard to put it, or impossible currently to put it into some other medium.
Okay, it's like if someone dies, right? If we maybe dissect their brain into another person or something, right? Is it possible that the consciousness that the person who died before is the same as it is transferred to the other body?
Well, the problem is, as we have discussed sometimes already, is that the brains are different, right? So the connections in your brain and your brain are different. The neurons are different. There are some typical things, for example, again, the area that processes faces is roughly at the same time, same place in your brains. The area that is responsible for moving this left hand is roughly the same place at your brains. But if you would then try to make experience or consciousness from one brain to another, you would basically need to first in very detailed manner record this one brain, and then you would basically need to change this other brain in some way we still don't know how, but then you would lose that guy's consciousness. So fundamentally, again, because consciousness is something that happens in brains, if we are able to preserve that level of detail that's necessary, or transform it into another brain, then it is possible. But it's not easy. It's currently impossible, right?
Yeah.
There are some companies that sell this this idea, or like this meditation mindfulness practices and courses, and they promise you that this can help you reprogram your brain in a better way to achieve your full potential and so on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned two things previously, right? I mentioned that you in 20s you have to work hard and do stuff, and I mentioned also you have to take breaks and rest, right? And meditation to me is like one component of this rest. It's not mandatory. It's not mandatory in the sense that not everybody has to do it, because we have our different ways how we rest. For example, when I was younger, I did karate and I did meditation, but it didn't really fit me. So now when I want to relax, I go for a walk, I am in nature, I listen to music. So that's my way of having this relaxed mindset. But meditation can work for some who don't find it in nature. So it's for me, it's like one way how you can get this very this rest for the brain, right? But meditation by itself, it doesn't fix you. It doesn't make you better by itself, but because you definitely to get ahead in life, to do cool things, you need to go back to this first component of doing hard work, putting in time and effort, using your neuroplasticity, right? So I do think that it's very problematic that all of these practices like meditation, that by itself, they are nice, they are monetized and turned into a business of getting money from people who really want to get better, because meditation, while it can help some, it's not some kind of a silver bullet that will make you a better person or that will fix all of your problems.
But it does improve our consciousness, right? When we start.
It can.
Yeah.
Again, it can. For some people it's not necessary, but if it works for you, then it's great. Use it. But it's not something, it's not a thing you can say like universally that if you meditate, everybody will get better, everybody will be better. When we study meditation, then we see that also there are people who have really like tough experiences under meditation. Meditation is not really good for them, but it brings about some bad experiences, right? So it's always kind of, it depends. We are so different, and each and every one of us has to find their own way of actually having these breaks from the everyday struggle. It could be meditation, it could be gardening, it could be skiing, it could be something else.
Yeah. When we are experiencing virtual reality, right, we are fully aware that this is not real and everything, but when we are like using that device, we think like if we are playing some game and if I die or something, we still feel like, oh, we are like, I'm in pain or something. How does that happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the end, also when people play these games, it's very different. So some people get super immersed in virtual reality or even simple computer games. And for other people, it's not like that. They don't get that immersed in these things. But once you get immersed, then you could say that, the brain is using this environment fully as if it would be a real environment. I mean, another example is dreams, right? I think many of us have died in dreams, and it's not nice, let's put it this way, but it's great to wake up then. But it's also an example of where the brain is simulating something, and then although it actually doesn't happen, it very much feels like it does. Yeah.
I would say I definitely was going through some stuff when I had my lucid dreams, because they're pretty scary. I would say it's pretty real and until you wake up. And you have you been in Startup Day Fest ever?
In Startup Day Fest, I haven't been in Startup Day Fest, I don't think.
Okay, so once I tried this VR.
Yeah, but I have done a lot of VR. I mean, we do a lot of VR.
And I can share from my personal experience that there was one thing where you were at the top of the building, but in reality you were just standing on some board, and you have this, you see this view, and you take a step back forward, okay, and you fall, but I feel the ground, but I had this feeling here like, oh my god.
You are falling from
I am
top
going
of the
down.
building, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, in our research, that's one line of research we do. We use virtual reality to change consciousness a bit, because we mentioned briefly psychedelics, right? The research over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years has shown that, psychedelics change consciousness, and if used properly, again, I'm not saying you should try it at home, but if used properly in a proper context, they can actually help against things like depression or addiction, if used properly. Now, in Estonia, these things are not legal, so we thought, okay, we are pretty good at virtual reality and studying consciousness, so let's generate virtual
Psychedelic
reality
experience.
that looks like psychedelics. So we did, and currently we have one scientific study out that showed that in moderate depression, these tools can actually help you to feel better. So 2 weeks after the experience, these people who had this psychedelic VR, they had lowered their depression scores. Now we're finishing just a study with people who have alcohol addiction, for example, to see whether it also works on that. So I'm just saying that, when we talk about virtual reality, then we kind of use it. We try to build these new tools to actually change consciousness for the better, so that we could actually help people.
That sounds great. We should share those papers with the audience actually.
Yeah, and we are there in Tartu, in the Tartu, Estonia, in the Delta building. So yeah, come and check it out.
Sounds good. I spent so much time there
Oh yeah, me too.
back in the day.
Well, then welcome back.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a last question. What are your thoughts on hypnosis?
Hypnosis, yeah, yeah, it's one of these very interesting phenomena that has interested people a lot
Mhm.
and scientists a lot. That has been studied quite a lot, but very fundamentally still don't know how it works, whether it works, and what are the neural mechanisms. Definitely, we know by today that again, it has been a reoccurring theme throughout the discussion that people are different. So hypnosis doesn't work on everyone. There are some people who go very well under hypnosis, but for others it doesn't work at all. So again, it's not an universal mechanism. That's why it's also very hard to study it, because then if you have the wrong participants, then it seems there's no such thing as hypnosis. I would not be so skeptical. I would say that there is something to it, but it's an example of a phenomenon we don't understand fully yet. And in that sense, it very well fits to this discussion about consciousness, because again, all of this topic on consciousness, there has been so much study over the last 30 years. Some of the best minds of the humanity have tried to figure this thing out, but we still haven't.
Yeah.
And I think it's also great, but it should make us also more humble. It should make us humble in the sense that we are humans, we figure out a lot of things, but there are still these cool mysteries in the universe and in our own brains.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think some people who are immune to hypnosis, I think they have high consciousness, if I can say that,
Oh, I don't know.
or like strong consciousness.
it's your
I-
podcast. You can say it. I cannot scientifically confirm
Okay,
that,
okay,
but
okay.
you
Sure,
can
sure,
say.
sure. Let's Let's keep it that
we
way.
need some scientific reasons for that.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess I could talk about it for hours, endless hours, but we gotta wrap up, right?
Wrap up for today.
Yeah.
Thank you,
This
Dr.
has been
Ann,
great. Thank you so much
yeah, for being
for
on
accepting
our
our
podcast.
invitation.
No,
and
it was
coming
great.
here.
It was great. I hope I changed your consciousness a bit.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah,
I feel more
we have
enlightened.
surely increased
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Dr. Ann. So see
Cheers,
you in the
everyone.
next one.
Subscribe, like, comment,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.